My mom told my wife she could easily replace her if the marriage didn't work. I found the text message at 11:34 p.m. on a Wednesday night while looking for my wife's phone charger. Her screen lit up with a notification from someone saved as K, and I wouldn't have looked except the preview made my stomach drop. Your mother-in-law just told me something you need to know. I unlocked it. My wife Olivia never kept her phone locked from me, one of those small trust things we'd always maintained. The message thread with her sister Kayla went back 3 hours, and I read the whole thing standing in our bedroom with my hands going numb. The last message was time-stamped 11:17 p.m. She said if things don't work out with you, she already has someone better in mind for him, someone who understands family values. She said you're replaceable. I read it again, then a third time. The words didn't change. I'd been married to Olivia for 6 years. We'd met in graduate school, both studying public health at the same university, and gotten engaged after 2 years of dating that felt effortless. She was brilliant, funny, patient with my mother's occasional boundary issues in a way I appreciated. My mom, Patricia, had always been involved in my life, maybe too involved, but I'd written it off as her being protective since my dad died when I was 15. She called every Sunday. She visited once a month. She gave unsolicited advice about our finances, our meal planning, our career choices. Olivia handled it with grace. She'd smile through my mom's comments about how we should be saving more aggressively, or how our apartment was too small to start a family, or how her friend's daughter made an excellent lasagna, and maybe Olivia should ask for the recipe. I'd told myself this was normal. All mothers were protective of their sons. All mother-in-law relationships had friction. I told myself these things while standing in my bedroom at 11:37 p.m., holding my wife's phone, reading evidence that my mother had just told her she was disposable. Olivia was at her book club meeting. She went every other Wednesday to her friend Nadia's house, a ritual she'd maintained since before we met. I sat on the edge of our bed and opened my own phone, pulling up my message thread with my mother. Our last conversation was from that morning. She'd sent me a link to an article about mortgage rates with the message, "You two need to stop renting and buy something before it's too late. I can help with the down payment if Olivia's student loans are the problem." I'd responded with a thumbs-up emoji because I'd learned that engaging with these comments only led to longer lectures. Now I scrolled back through weeks of messages, looking for patterns I'd missed. Most were benign: recipes, news articles, questions about my work. But scattered throughout were little barbs. "Is Olivia feeling better? She looked tired at dinner last week. You should make sure she's taking care of herself. Did you see Jennifer got promoted again? She's doing so well for herself." Jennifer was my mom's friend's daughter, the one with the lasagna recipe, the one my mother mentioned at least once a month. I'd never thought about why. The front door opened at 11:52 p.m. Olivia came in carrying her book club tote bag, smiling until she saw my face. She asked what was wrong. I handed her the phone, watched her expression shift from confusion to recognition to something that looked like relief. That's what gutted me. Relief. Like she'd been waiting for me to finally see it. She sat down next to me and asked how much of the conversation with Kayla I'd read. I said all of it. She nodded slowly and told me there was more. That the comment about replacing her wasn't the first time my mother had said something like that. It was just the first time she'd said it directly to Olivia, instead of through implications and comparisons. She told me about the dinner 3 months ago when my mom had pulled her aside in the kitchen and asked if she was sure she wanted to keep working full-time, because successful marriages require one person to prioritize the home. She told me about the coffee meeting 6 months before that, when my mother had invited her out supposedly to bond, and spent an hour listing all the ways Olivia's career focus might be preventing us from having children, which Olivia and I had decided privately to delay. She told me about dozens of small comments over the years that I'd missed or dismissed because I wasn't the target. I felt sick, not just about what my mother had done, but about my own blindness. Olivia had tried to tell me before. I remembered conversations where she'd mentioned my mother's behavior, and I'd minimized it. She means well. That's just how she is. She's from a different generation. All the things people say when they don't want to admit their parent is causing harm. I asked Olivia why she hadn't pushed harder, why she'd let it continue for so long. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read and said, "Because I was afraid of exactly this, of you choosing her over me." The words hung between us. I wanted to tell her that would never happen, that she was my wife and my priority. But the truth was, I hadn't prioritized her. Not when it mattered. I'd let my mother cross boundaries for years because confronting her seemed harder than asking Olivia to endure it. I'd taken the path of least resistance and called it peacekeeping. Olivia deserved better than that. Better than me, maybe. We stayed up until 3 a.m. talking. She showed me her phone, a folder of screenshots she'd been keeping, text messages from my mother, email exchanges, photos from family dinners where my mom's arm was around me and Olivia was cropped to the edge of the frame. Voice memos Olivia had recorded after particularly bad interactions, just documenting what had been said in case she ever needed proof. In case I ever didn't believe her. The fact that she'd felt the need to collect evidence against my own mother made me want to break something. One screenshot was from 4 months ago. My mother had texted her, "I know you're busy with work, but David needs a wife who can be present. Have you considered scaling back your hours? Another from 7 months ago. Jennifer mentioned she's single again. Such a shame. She'd make someone a wonderful wife. Another from a year ago. I raised David to expect certain things from a marriage. I hope you understand what that means. Olivia had responded to each one with polite deflections. She'd never told me about any of them. When I asked why, she said she'd been trying to preserve my relationship with my mother. She'd thought if she could just outlast this phase, if she could just be perfect enough, my mother would accept her. Now she knew that would never happen. Thursday morning came too fast. I called in sick to work, something I almost never did. Olivia had a meeting she couldn't miss, so she left at 8:30 a.m., after making me promise I wouldn't do anything rash. I promised, then immediately broke that promise by calling my mother. She answered on the second ring, cheerful and oblivious, asked if I wanted to come over for dinner on Sunday. I asked if we could meet for coffee instead, today, just the two of us. She hesitated, and I could hear the calculation in that pause. She asked if everything was okay. I said we needed to talk about Olivia. Another pause. Then she said she had time at 2 p.m. at the cafe near her house. I agreed and hung up before she could ask more questions. The next few hours felt surreal. I cleaned the apartment, something I did when I needed to think, loaded the dishwasher, folded laundry, organized the bookshelf, all while my brain ran in circles trying to figure out what I was going to say. How do you confront your mother about sabotaging your marriage? How do you tell the person who raised you that they've been hurting the person you chose to spend your life with? I didn't have answers. Just anger and guilt and a growing awareness that I'd failed the one person who deserved my protection most. The cafe at 2 p.m. was nearly empty. My mother was already there, sitting at a corner table with a latte and her phone. She stood up when she saw me, smiled, tried to hug me. I stepped back, sat down across from her without ordering anything. She asked again if everything was okay, her voice pitched with concern that might have been genuine. I didn't know anymore. I asked her directly, "Did you tell Olivia she was replaceable?" Her face did something complicated. Surprise, then defensiveness, then a careful neutrality that told me everything. She said she didn't know what I was talking about. I pulled out my phone and read her the text Kayla had sent Olivia. Word for word. My mother's expression shifted again, this time to something that looked like anger. She said Kayla was exaggerating, that she'd simply mentioned that if things didn't work out, there were other women who might be better suited to what I needed in a partner. She said it as if this was a reasonable thing to say, as if she hadn't just admitted to planning my wife's replacement. I asked her what the hell that meant. What did I need in a partner that Olivia wasn't providing? She leaned forward, and her voice dropped into that particular tone she used when she thought she was being helpful. She said Olivia was a lovely person, but maybe not the right fit for our family. Too focused on her career, not domestic enough, not interested in children, or at least not interested enough to make them a priority. I interrupted, told her Olivia and I had decided together to wait on kids, that it was our decision, not hers. My mother waved this away like I was a child who didn't understand his own mind. She said I might think that now, but eventually I'd regret it. Eventually, I'd want a family, and Olivia wouldn't be able to give me that because she was too invested in her job. She said she was just trying to protect me from future disappointment. That's when I showed her the screenshots. All of them. The texts, the emails, the documented conversations. I watched her face change as she realized how much evidence existed, how long Olivia had been keeping track. She tried to laugh it off at first, said I was overreacting, that mothers and daughters-in-law always had friction, that Olivia was being sensitive. I told her to stop. Just stop. I said what she'd done wasn't normal friction. It was intentional undermining. That she'd been trying to destroy my marriage, and I couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. My mother's expression hardened. She said if my marriage was strong enough, nothing she said would matter. The fact that I was here, accusing her of sabotage, proved that the marriage was already weak. She said she'd raised me better than to speak to her this way, that she'd sacrificed everything after my father died to give me a good life, that she deserved respect, not accusations. I left, just stood up and walked out while she was still talking. Got in my car and drove for an hour with no destination, just trying to process what had happened. My mother had essentially admitted to everything, then blamed me for being upset about it. There was no apology, no recognition of harm, just justification and deflection, and a fundamental belief that she was entitled to interfere in my marriage because she was my mother. I ended up in the parking lot of a hiking trail Olivia and I used to visit when we first moved to the city. Sat there until the sun started to set, then called her. Told her about the conversation. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she asked what I wanted to do. I said I didn't know. She said she did. She wanted to go to counseling, but not couples counseling. Family therapy. With my mother. With a professional who could help mediate this before it destroyed us completely. I told her my mother would never agree to that. Olivia said then we'd have our answer about whether she was willing to change. I thought about my mother's face in that cafe, the hard set of her jaw when she told me I was speaking to her disrespectfully. Olivia was right. This would force my mother to choose between her need for control and her relationship with me. Friday afternoon, I called my mother and left a voicemail. Told her Olivia and I wanted to do family therapy and that her participation was mandatory if she wanted to continue being part of our lives. I didn't wait for a response. Instead, I called a therapist whose name Olivia had already researched. Dr. Nina Okonkwo, licensed family therapist with 23 years of experience specializing in intergenerational conflict and boundary issues. Her office had an opening the following week. I booked it for all three of us, sent my mother the details in a text, and told her I expected her to be there. She called me back within 10 minutes, said I was being ridiculous, that she didn't need therapy, that this was Olivia manipulating me into cutting her out. I told her it wasn't negotiable. Either she came to therapy, or she wouldn't see me until she agreed to work on this. She said I was breaking her heart. I said she'd already broken mine. Then I hung up. Olivia came home that evening and found me sitting in the dark. She sat next to me without turning on the lights. Asked if I was okay. I told her I didn't know how to be anyone's son anymore. Didn't know how to reconcile the mother who raised me with the woman who'd tried to destroy my marriage. Olivia put her head on my shoulder and said I didn't have to figure it out tonight. We sat like that for a long time. My mother showed up to therapy. That surprised me. Dr. Okonkwo's office was on the third floor of a professional building, decorated in soothing blues and grays, with degrees on the wall from Duke University and certificates from various family therapy organizations. My mother arrived exactly on time, dressed formally like she was going to court. She shook Dr. Okonkwo's hand and introduced herself with the same polite charm she used with strangers. We all sat down. Dr. Okonkwo explained the process. This was a safe space to discuss family dynamics, with the goal of understanding each person's perspective and establishing healthier boundaries. She asked my mother to share her view of the situation. My mother sighed, looked at me with an expression of patient suffering, and said she loved her son very much, that she'd always wanted the best for him, that she was concerned about his marriage because Olivia seemed more committed to her career than to their relationship. She said she'd perhaps been too vocal about these concerns, but only because she cared. Dr. Okonkwo asked for specific examples. My mother hesitated, then mentioned that Olivia worked long hours, that we didn't have children yet, that she'd noticed tension between us at family dinners, everything carefully worded to make her sound concerned rather than controlling. When Dr. Okonkwo asked Olivia to respond, my wife pulled out her phone. She'd prepared for this. She read excerpts from the screenshots I'd seen, the text about being replaceable, the email about Jennifer, the conversation about scaling back work hours. She read them in a steady voice that didn't waver, even though I could see her hands shaking. My mother's facade cracked. She said Olivia was taking things out of context, that she'd never meant those comments the way they sounded, that Olivia was being oversensitive. Dr. Okonkwo interrupted gently, asked my mother if she could understand why those messages might feel hurtful, regardless of intent. My mother said she supposed so, but that Olivia should have talked to her directly instead of running to me with complaints. I spoke up then, told my mother that Olivia had tried to handle it on her own for years, that she'd been patient and gracious while my mother systematically undermined her, that I'd been too blind or too cowardly to see it until now. My mother's eyes filled with tears. She said I was ganging up on her, that she was being attacked for caring too much. Dr. Okonkwo stopped the session there, said we were clearly dealing with deeply entrenched patterns and that progress would take time. She wanted to see us separately for a few sessions before bringing us back together. My mother agreed, though I could see the reluctance in her posture. As we left, she tried to hug me. I let her, but I didn't hug back. That small rejection seemed to hurt her more than anything said in the session. Good, I thought, then immediately felt guilty for thinking it. The next week brought individual sessions. I saw Dr. Okonkwo on Monday. She asked about my childhood, my relationship with my father before he died, how my mother had handled her grief. I told her my dad had been sick for a year before he passed, cancer. My mother had thrown herself into caregiving, then after he died, into raising me. She'd never dated again, never developed hobbies or friendships outside of me. Her whole identity had become David's mom. Dr. Okonkwo wrote notes and asked if I'd ever felt responsible for my mother's happiness. I said yes, always, even as an adult. She asked if that responsibility had influenced my choice to minimize her behavior toward Olivia. I said I didn't know. Maybe. Probably. She asked what would happen if I stopped taking responsibility for my mother's emotional state. I told her honestly, I was terrified to find out. Olivia's session was on Wednesday. She came home looking exhausted. Said Dr. Okonkwo had asked her about boundaries and whether she felt safe in our marriage. Olivia had said she didn't know anymore, that she loved me, but wasn't sure I could actually choose her over my mother when it mattered. That confession hurt worse than anything else. My mother's session was on Friday. Dr. Okonkwo called me that evening after it ended. She didn't share details from the session itself, but she said something that made my blood run cold. Your mother has some very fixed beliefs about her role in your life. I want you to be prepared for the possibility that she may not be able to change. I asked what that meant. She said it meant I might have to make difficult choices about the kind of relationship I could have with my mother moving forward. Choices that would feel like betrayal, but were actually self-preservation. The group session the following week was worse than the first. My mother came in with a prepared statement. She'd written it out on notebook paper, her handwriting careful and deliberate. She read it aloud while Olivia and I sat in stunned silence. She apologized for any hurt she'd caused, said she could see now that some of her comments had been inappropriate. But there was always a but. She said she still believed that family came first, and that meant being honest even when it was uncomfortable. She said she hoped we could all move past this and return to normal. Dr. Okonkwo asked what normal meant to her. My mother said family dinners every week, regular phone calls, being included in major decisions, being treated like the important person she was in my life. Dr. Okonkwo turned to Olivia and asked what she needed for the relationship to continue. Olivia said clear boundaries. No more comments about her career, her body, her choices. No more comparisons to other women. No more attempts to insert herself into our marriage decisions. An actual apology, not a qualified one. My mother stiffened, said she'd already apologized. Olivia shook her head and said, "You apologized for hurting us, not for what you did. There's a difference." My mother looked at me, waiting for me to defend her. I stayed silent. She stood up, said this was clearly a waste of time if she was going to be ganged up on, that she loved me but wouldn't subject herself to this humiliation anymore. She walked out, just left us sitting there with Dr. Okonkwo. The next 3 weeks were silent. My mother didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up to scheduled sessions with Dr. Okonkwo. I felt the absence like a physical wound. Olivia watched me carefully during this time, trying to gauge whether I'd break, whether I'd run back to my mother to fix things, even if it meant sacrificing our marriage. I didn't. But I thought about it constantly. Thought about calling my mom, apologizing, telling her we could work it out. Then I'd remember Olivia's face when she showed me those screenshots. The relief when I finally saw the truth. I stayed quiet, stayed present, stayed in my marriage. Then on a Sunday morning, 3 weeks after the failed therapy session, my mother showed up at our apartment. Olivia answered the door. I heard their voices from the bedroom and came out to find my mother standing in our living room with a bag from the bakery Olivia liked, the one 40 minutes across town, an offering. My mother looked smaller somehow, tired. She said she'd been thinking, that maybe she had been too involved, that maybe she needed to let me live my own life. It almost sounded like progress. Then she looked at Olivia and said, "I just want what's best for David. Surely you can understand that." Olivia said, "What's best for David is for you to respect his choices, including his choice to marry me." My mother's smile tightened. Of course, that's what I meant. But it wasn't. I could see it in her eyes, the way she looked at Olivia like an obstacle to remove rather than a person to accept. This wasn't change. This was strategy. My mother had realized direct confrontation wasn't working, so she was switching tactics, being nicer, more subtle, waiting for cracks. I looked at Olivia and saw her seeing the same thing. We'd been through too much for pleasantries to fix this. My mother needed to actually change, not just pretend better. I told her we appreciated the gesture, but that we couldn't have her in our home right now, not until she'd demonstrated consistent respect for our boundaries over time. She looked stunned, said she'd driven all this way, brought Olivia's favorite pastries, was trying to make amends. I said I knew. I also knew this wasn't real change, that we needed space. She needed to leave. My mother's face went cold. She said fine, if that's what I wanted. If I wanted to choose a woman I'd known for 8 years over the mother who'd raised me for 32 years, that was my choice. She said she wouldn't beg for a relationship with her own son. She left the pastries on our counter and walked out. I found myself shaking after she'd gone. Olivia held me while I cried for the first time since this started. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd never really had. A mother who could love me without needing to control me. May brought a new pattern. My mother started calling mutual acquaintances, family friends, my aunt, her sister. All carefully worded conversations where she played the victim, said I'd cut her off, that my wife had turned me against her, that she was heartbroken but trying to respect my space. I found out from my cousin, who called to ask what was going on, said my mother had been telling everyone that Olivia had isolated me, that I was under some kind of undue influence. I asked my cousin if she believed that. She hesitated, then said she didn't know what to believe, that my mother sounded genuinely hurt, that maybe I was being too harsh. I sent her the screenshots, the emails, the documented evidence of years of boundary violations. My cousin called back an hour later, said, "Oh my God, I had no idea." I told her nobody did, that my mother had been careful to hide the worst of it, to play the loving, concerned parent in public while systematically trying to destroy my marriage in private. My cousin asked what I needed. I said I needed people to stop believing my mother's version by default. She promised to set the record straight with other family members. I thanked her and hung up, feeling simultaneously vindicated and exhausted. This was what choosing Olivia meant. Constant battles, constant explanations, constant proof. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. June brought escalation. My mother hired a private investigator. I found out because the investigator wasn't as subtle as he thought. Olivia noticed the same car in different parking lots near her office. Same man, different locations. She mentioned it to building security. They checked the plates, ran them through their system, found they belonged to a licensed PI firm. Olivia called them directly, asked who'd hired them and why they were following her. They refused to say. She said she'd file a police report for stalking unless they disclosed their client. The investigator called his client. 2 hours later, my mother called me, asked why my wife was threatening people. I asked why she'd hired someone to follow Olivia. She said she was concerned, that Olivia had been acting strangely, that maybe I didn't know everything about the woman I'd married. I asked what she thought she was going to find. An affair? Drug use? Some secret that would prove she'd been right all along? My mother said she just wanted to make sure I was safe. I told her what she was doing was illegal harassment, that if she didn't call off the investigator immediately, I'd file a restraining order. She laughed. Actually laughed. Said I wouldn't do that to my own mother. I said, "Watch me." Then I hung up and called a lawyer. The lawyer's name was attorney Melissa Vance, a family law specialist with 14 years of experience in harassment and restraining order cases. She had an office downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and shelves full of legal texts. I told her everything, showed her the evidence. The screenshots, the emails, the documentation from Dr. Okonkwo about my mother's behavior in therapy, the PI incident. Attorney Vance listened carefully, taking notes. When I finished, she asked if I was sure I wanted to pursue this. Said restraining orders against parents were difficult emotionally, even when justified legally. I said I was sure. She explained the process. We'd need to file a petition demonstrating a pattern of harassment or stalking. The PI incident helped establish recent behavior. The therapy notes would show escalation despite intervention. We'd likely get a temporary order, then there'd be a hearing where my mother could contest it. If the judge agreed there was sufficient evidence of harassment, we'd get a permanent order. Attorney Vance asked if I understood that this would permanently damage my relationship with my mother. I said it was already damaged. This was just making it official. She nodded and started drafting the paperwork. Olivia came with me to file the petition. We stood at the courthouse counter together while a clerk stamped the documents and assigned a hearing date. September 14th, 4 months away. The temporary order was approved that day, prohibiting my mother from contacting me or Olivia directly or through third parties, and requiring her to stay at least 500 feet away from our home and workplaces. The sheriff's deputy delivered the order to my mother's house on a Thursday evening. I know because she immediately violated it by calling me from her sister's phone. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail. Her voice was shaking with rage. She said I'd betrayed her, that no son should treat his mother this way, that she'd given up everything for me, and this was how I repaid her, that I'd regret this for the rest of my life. She said she hoped Olivia was worth losing my family over. The voicemail was 2 minutes and 38 seconds long. I saved it and forwarded it to Attorney Vance as evidence of the first violation. Attorney Vance said we could have her held in contempt, but recommended waiting to see if the behavior continued. If my mother violated the order multiple times, it would strengthen our case for the permanent order. I hated the strategic calculation of it, hating that my relationship with my mother had become a legal matter with evidence logs and court dates. But I also understood it was necessary. My mother had proven she wouldn't respect boundaries without enforcement. The law was the only language she understood now. Over the next 3 days, she violated the temporary order 6 more times, called from different numbers, sent letters to our apartment, showed up at Olivia's workplace. Each violation was documented, photographed, reported. Attorney Vance filed a motion for contempt. The judge ordered my mother to appear in court. The contempt hearing was brief and brutal. My mother showed up with her own lawyer, a family friend who practiced estate law and clearly didn't understand restraining order proceedings. The judge reviewed the violations, the phone calls from multiple numbers, the letters, the workplace appearance, security footage from Olivia's building showing my mother in the lobby, arguing with reception staff who'd been instructed not to allow her access. My mother's lawyer tried to argue that these were the actions of a concerned mother trying to reach her son. The judge said they were the actions of someone willfully violating a court order. He held her in contempt, fined her $2,000, and sternly warned that future violations would result in jail time. My mother sat in the defendant's chair, crying. I watched from the other side of the courtroom and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not sadness, just a hollow awareness that this was where we'd ended up. Afterward, in the hallway, her lawyer tried to approach me, said maybe we could work something out, that this was hard on everyone. Attorney Vance stepped between us and said there was nothing to work out. We'd see them at the permanent order hearing in September. My mother stood at the other end of the hallway, watching. Our eyes met for a second. She looked old, defeated. Then her expression hardened into something I didn't recognize. She turned and left without saying anything. August brought silence. No more violations, no more letters or calls or unexpected appearances. My mother had apparently learned that the legal system would actually enforce its orders, but the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like the eye of a storm. Attorney Vance warned me that people often got more desperate before final hearings, that my mother might try something dramatic to prove she wasn't a threat, or might escalate in a final attempt to regain control. I installed security cameras at our apartment, changed our daily routines, briefed Olivia's workplace security again. We lived in a state of constant vigilance, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It fell 3 weeks before the hearing. I got a call from my aunt, my mother's sister. She said my mother was in the hospital. She'd taken pills. Too many pills. Not enough to kill her, but enough to make a statement. The doctors said it wasn't a serious suicide attempt, more like a cry for help. My aunt said the hospital wanted to keep her for psychiatric evaluation, but she needed family to sign some forms. She asked if I'd come. I said no. My aunt was shocked, said whatever was happening between us, this was still my mother. She was in crisis. I said she'd been in crisis for 8 months and had refused every opportunity for actual help. That this was manipulation, not mental illness. That I wouldn't reward this behavior by breaking the restraining order. My aunt called me heartless. I said maybe I was. Then I hung up and called Attorney Vance to report the contact. Attorney Vance said the suicide attempt complicated things. Not legally, the restraining order stood, but emotionally. The judge might view my mother more sympathetically if she presented as mentally fragile. We needed to be prepared for her lawyer to use this as evidence that she was suffering and needed her son's support, not a restraining order. I asked if it would work. Attorney Vance said it might, if we didn't have the documented pattern of behavior showing this was part of a larger manipulation strategy. She asked if I was okay. I said I didn't know. Part of me wanted to go to the hospital, wanted to see if my mother was actually okay, despite everything. But I knew that's what she wanted. That this whole incident was designed to make me feel guilty enough to cave. Dr. Okonkwo said the same thing when I saw her that week. She said my mother's behavior was classic escalation. When boundary violations and contempt charges didn't work, she'd moved to a different kind of emotional leverage. The suicide attempt was serious enough to require attention, but not serious enough to actually endanger her life. It was calculated. Dr. Okonkwo asked how I felt about that assessment. I said it made me sick, made me question whether my mother was capable of genuine emotion, or if everything had always been performance. Dr. Okonkwo said both could be true, that my mother might genuinely be suffering while also weaponizing that suffering, that people could hurt and manipulate simultaneously. It didn't make the manipulation less wrong, but it made the situation more complex. The hearing on September 14th came faster than I expected. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, a few rows of seats where Olivia and I sat with Attorney Vance. My mother arrived with her lawyer and my aunt. She looked thin, fragile. Her lawyer had clearly coached her on optics. She wore a simple dress, minimal makeup, and carried tissues. When the judge entered, we all stood. Judge Richard Freeman, 15 years on the family court bench. He reviewed the case file, then asked Attorney Vance to present our evidence. She did, methodically. The screenshots from the beginning, the therapy notes from Dr. Okonkwo, the private investigator incident, the 6 documented violations of the temporary order, the contempt finding, each piece building a pattern of escalating harassment and boundary violation. My mother's lawyer countered with character witnesses. My aunt testified that my mother was a devoted parent who'd sacrificed everything for me. A family friend said she'd known my mother for 20 years and never saw any signs of the controlling behavior described. Another friend said my mother had been devastated by my wedding, not because she opposed it, but because she felt excluded from the planning, a lie I knew was intentional since my mother had been heavily involved in every detail. Each witness painted the same picture: concerned mother, overreacting son, manipulative wife. I felt Olivia tense beside me. Then it was our turn. Olivia took the stand first. Attorney Vance asked her to describe the comment that started everything. Olivia told the story about being told she was replaceable, and I watched the judge's expression shift. Attorney Vance asked if there had been other incidents. Olivia detailed them. The constant comparisons to Jennifer. The suggestions that she scale back her career. The implication that she wasn't good enough for the family. She spoke calmly, referencing specific dates and conversations. My mother's lawyer cross-examined. Asked if maybe Olivia had misinterpreted some of these comments, if perhaps she was being oversensitive. Olivia said no. She'd given my mother every benefit of the doubt for 6 years, and the pattern was clear. The lawyer asked if Olivia had alienated me from my mother. Olivia looked directly at my mother and said, "Your son chose to protect his marriage. That's not alienation. That's him finally prioritizing the right relationship." My mother's lawyer moved on. Dr. Okonkwo testified next, explaining the family therapy sessions, my mother's resistance to acknowledging boundaries, her refusal to participate once confronted with her behavior. Under oath, Dr. Okonkwo stated that in her professional opinion, my mother's actions constituted a pattern of intentional psychological harm designed to undermine my marriage. The lawyer tried to discredit her, suggesting she was biased because we'd hired her. Dr. Okonkwo calmly noted that she'd tried to include all parties equally in therapy, and that my mother's own statements in session supported her assessment. I testified last. My mother's lawyer asked if I loved my mother. I said yes, but that love didn't mean accepting abuse. He asked if I thought a restraining order was proportionate. I said yes, after everything else had failed. He asked if I was prepared to never speak to my mother again over what he called a family disagreement. I said I'd tried speaking to her for 8 months. She'd hired a private investigator to follow my wife. She'd violated a court order 6 times in 3 days. She'd attempted suicide as a manipulation tactic. This wasn't a disagreement. This was a pattern of behavior that endangered my marriage and my wife's safety. The lawyer asked if I thought my mother was dangerous. I looked at my mother, sitting at the defendant's table with tears running down her face. I said, "Not physically, but emotionally? Yes. She's been trying to destroy my marriage from the beginning, and she's proven she won't stop unless forced." The judge asked if I had anything else to add. I said, "My mother told my wife she could easily replace her if the marriage didn't work. But the truth is, I can't replace my wife. I don't want to. And I need my mother to understand that Olivia isn't going anywhere, and if she can't accept that, then we can't have a relationship." The courtroom was silent. My mother was crying openly now. The judge called a brief recess to review his notes. When court resumed 20 minutes later, Judge Freeman delivered his ruling. He said this case represented a difficult intersection of family relationships and legal boundaries. That while he appreciated the complexity of parent-child dynamics, the evidence showed a clear pattern of harassment that had persisted despite intervention. He noted that the violations of the temporary order were particularly concerning, as they demonstrated an unwillingness to respect court authority. He cited the private investigator incident as evidence of escalation. Then he addressed my mother directly. Said she seemed like a woman who loved her son very much, but that love had become possessive and controlling. That her actions, however well-intentioned she believed them to be, constituted harassment under the law. He granted the permanent restraining order. 3 years. Renewable if violations continued. My mother could not contact me or Olivia directly or indirectly. Could not come within 500 feet of our home, workplaces, or any location where we were present. If she violated, she'd face immediate arrest. My mother stood up, ignoring her lawyer's attempt to quiet her. She looked at me and said, "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." The judge warned her to sit down. She didn't. She said, "She'll leave you eventually. And when she does, don't come crying to me." The judge held her in contempt again, fined her another $3,000, and sentenced her to 48 hours in county jail for the outburst. Bailiffs led her out, still talking, still trying to get me to react. I watched her go and felt the weight of 32 years break. Outside the courthouse, Olivia held my hand while I tried to process what had happened. Attorney Vance said the order was solid, said the outburst in court had actually helped our case by demonstrating exactly the kind of behavior we'd been describing. If my mother appealed, we'd win. I asked what happened now. Attorney Vance said we moved on with our lives. The order would remain in effect for 3 years unless my mother violated it, which would trigger extensions and potential jail time. We had legal protection. Now we needed to work on emotional healing. She recommended continuing therapy, both individual and couples. Said I'd likely need time to grieve the relationship I'd wanted with my mother, even though it had never really existed. I thanked her and paid her final invoice. $8,200 total for everything, worth every penny to finally have peace. Olivia and I drove home in silence. When we got to our apartment, the one my mother could no longer legally approach, Olivia asked if I was okay. I said honestly, I didn't know. I felt relief and grief and guilt all tangled together. She said that was normal, that I'd done what I needed to do, but that didn't make it easy. We ordered takeout and sat on the couch, not talking much, just existing in the same space, safe, protected, finally choosing each other first. 3 months later, Olivia got a promotion at work, department head, the position she'd been working toward for years. When she told me, I saw her wait for my reaction. Saw her prepare for me to mention how my mother would have responded to this news, how she would have found some way to diminish it or make it about herself. Instead, I picked her up and spun her around and told her I was proud of her. We celebrated with an expensive dinner, the kind my mother would have said was wasteful. I didn't care. Olivia had earned this, had fought for it while also fighting to survive in a marriage where her mother-in-law had actively tried to replace her. She deserved every success. That night, in bed, she told me she'd been scared for a long time, that I'd eventually resent her for the restraining order, that I'd blame her for losing my mother. I told her I'd lost my mother years ago, I just hadn't been willing to admit it. What we'd lost was the illusion of a relationship that didn't exist. What we'd gained was a marriage where we both felt safe. She cried, and I held her, and for the first time in 8 months, I felt like maybe we'd actually make it through this. The restraining order changed things in ways I hadn't expected. Holidays became simpler. No more navigating my mother's expectations or dealing with her attempts to create drama. Christmas was just Olivia and me, quiet and calm. We started new traditions, cooked elaborate meals together, watched movies in our pajamas, existed without the constant undercurrent of tension. My aunt stopped calling after the hearing. Apparently my mother's outburst in court had been embarrassing enough that even her biggest defenders had to acknowledge the pattern. I heard through my cousin that my mother was seeing a therapist, though I didn't know if that was true or another manipulation. Either way, it wasn't my responsibility anymore. Dr. Okonkwo said that was one of the healthiest things I could recognize, that I wasn't responsible for my mother's choices or her healing. I was only responsible for my own life and my own marriage. I worked on that, went to individual therapy, dealt with the guilt and the anger and the grief, learned what healthy boundaries actually looked like, started recognizing all the ways my mother had trained me from childhood to prioritize her emotional needs over everyone else's, including my own. It was painful work. Some days I wanted to quit, but Olivia was there, patient, and supportive, reminding me why this mattered. A year after the hearing, I got a letter. Not from my mother directly, that would have violated the order, but from her therapist, Dr. Raymond Ellis, licensed clinical psychologist. The letter said my mother had been working in therapy and had asked Dr. Ellis to reach out on her behalf to see if I'd be willing to participate in a mediated conversation at some point in the future. Not now, necessarily, but eventually, when I was ready. The letter emphasized that this wasn't about reconciliation necessarily, but about closure and understanding. I showed it to Dr. Okonkwo. She asked how I felt about it. I said I didn't know. Part of me wanted to believe my mother had actually changed. Part of me knew this was probably another tactic. Dr. Okonkwo said I didn't have to decide now, that I could sit with the possibility and see how I felt in a few months. I put the letter in a drawer and tried not to think about it. 2 months later, I still hadn't responded. The restraining order had another year and 8 months to run. I wasn't ready. Might never be ready. Olivia said that was okay. Said I didn't owe my mother anything, including forgiveness or closure. That the work she needed to do was hers alone, whether I participated or not. Some days were harder than others. I'd see mothers and sons together in public, easy affection and mutual respect, and feel the loss acutely. I'd wonder if things could have been different if I'd set boundaries earlier, if I'd seen the pattern sooner, if I'd protected Olivia better from the beginning. Dr. Okonkwo reminded me that blame wasn't productive, that I'd done the best I could with the tools I had at the time, and that I'd ultimately made the right choice even though it was painful. Olivia said similar things, reminded me that we were building something better now, a marriage based on actual partnership and mutual respect. She said she felt safer with me than she ever had before, knowing I'd chosen her even when it cost me everything I thought I knew about family. That knowledge, she said, was worth all the pain we'd been through. I believed her. Chose to believe her. Chose to believe that my mother's inability to accept my marriage didn't define what that marriage could be. We talked about the future sometimes, about whether we'd have kids, whether we'd feel comfortable raising children with my mother's restraining order still in effect, whether that would be fair to any child we brought into this complicated family dynamic. Olivia said we didn't have to decide now, that we had time, that whatever we chose, we'd do it together. That certainty, that solid partnership, felt like the thing I'd been searching for my whole life without knowing it. 2 years after the hearing, the restraining order came up for review. Attorney Vance reached out to ask if we wanted to renew it. My mother hadn't violated it once in that time. No contact, no attempts to circumvent, no third-party harassment. She'd actually followed the rules. That should have made me feel hopeful, but instead, it made me cautious. I asked Attorney Vance what she recommended. She said the decision was personal, not legal. That we had grounds to renew if we wanted the protection to continue. Or we could let it lapse and see what happened. The choice was ours. I talked to Olivia. She said she'd support whatever I decided, but that she didn't feel safe without the legal protection yet. That was enough for me. We renewed the order for another 3 years. Part of me felt guilty about it. My mother had, from all appearances, respected our boundaries for 2 full years. But respecting boundaries because a court order forced her to wasn't the same as actually changing her beliefs about her entitlement to control my life. I needed more time, more proof, more certainty that engaging with her wouldn't drag us back into the same destructive patterns. So the order stood, and life continued. Olivia and I celebrated our 9th anniversary, bought a small house, started talking seriously about children, built a life that felt stable and safe in ways I hadn't understood were possible when I was constantly managing my mother's expectations and emotions. On what would have been our 10th anniversary, I finally responded to Dr. Ellis's letter, sent him a brief note saying I appreciated my mother's work in therapy, but that I wasn't ready for contact yet. That if and when that changed, I'd reach out, that he shouldn't contact me again on her behalf. I felt lighter after sending it, like I'd acknowledged the possibility without committing to anything, like I'd honored the small part of me that still loved my mother, while protecting the larger part that had learned to love myself and my wife more. Dr. Okonkwo said that was growth. Said I'd moved from reactive decisions made in crisis to thoughtful choices made from a place of stability. That I'd done the hard work of separating who I wished my mother was from who she'd actually shown herself to be. That I'd grieved the mother I'd needed and accepted the mother I'd had. The one who'd told my wife she could easily replace her. The one who'd rather lose her son than respect his boundaries. The one who'd loved me, yes, but had loved control more. I'd built a life without her. A good life. A life where my wife knew she wasn't replaceable. Where partnership mattered more than possession. Where love didn't require sacrifice of self. My mother had tried to destroy that. Instead, she'd destroyed herself in our world. Burned down the relationship through her own choices. I'd simply stopped trying to rebuild what she kept setting on fire. Some nights, I still dreamed about her. Dreams where she'd changed, where she apologized for real, where we found a way back to each other. I'd wake up feeling the loss fresh and sharp. Then I'd turn over and see Olivia sleeping next to me, solid and real and here, and I'd remember why I'd made the choices I'd made. She was worth it. We were worth it. The marriage we'd fought for was worth more than the fantasy of a mother who'd never really existed. Dr. Okonkwo asked me once what I'd tell my younger self if I could go back to that Wednesday night at 11:34 p.m. when I first found the text message. I thought about it for a long time. Finally said I'd tell him to trust what he was about to see, to believe his wife when she showed him years of evidence, to not minimize or rationalize or explain away what was right in front of him, to understand that choosing his wife didn't mean betraying his mother. It meant honoring his commitments and protecting the life he'd built. That the relationship with his mother was already broken, had maybe always been broken, and that acknowledging that truth wasn't failure. It was survival. I'd tell him that the next few years would be the hardest of his life, but that he'd come through them with a marriage stronger than he'd ever imagined possible, that he'd learn what real partnership looked like, that he'd become the kind of man who could protect what mattered, even when it meant losing everything he thought he knew about family. The restraining order still has 18 months left. I don't know what will happen when it expires. Whether I'll reach out, whether my mother will have actually changed, or whether the silence is just strategic patience, whether we'll ever have a conversation that doesn't leave me feeling manipulated and exhausted. But I know I don't have to decide now. I know that whatever happens, Olivia and I will face it together. That she's not replaceable. That she never was. That the only person who couldn't see her worth was the one person who should have celebrated it most. My mother thought she could control me by threatening my marriage. Instead, she showed me exactly how strong that marriage was, how willing we both were to fight for it, how much we were capable of surviving when we chose each other first. She'd meant it as a warning. This woman is replaceable. But what I'd heard, finally, clearly, was this. My mother's role in my life was the only thing that could be replaced, and I'd replaced it with something better, with peace, with partnership, with a life built on choice rather than obligation. She'd lost. Not because Olivia won some imaginary competition, but because I'd finally understood that the game itself was rigged. That a mother who truly loved me would have celebrated my happiness, not tried to destroy it. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to see you as anything but an extension of themselves. I still love her. Probably always will. You don't stop loving your mother just because she hurts you. But love doesn't require access, doesn't require relationship, doesn't require me to sacrifice my marriage on the altar of her expectations. I can love her from a distance, can hope she's doing well in her own life, can acknowledge the good parts of my childhood without excusing the bad parts of her current behavior. That nuance, that ability to hold both truths simultaneously, feels like the most adult thing I've ever done. Dr. Okonkwo called it integration. The ability to see someone completely, flaws and virtues both, and make decisions based on reality rather than fantasy. I'd integrated, accepted, moved on. The woman who'd raised me and the woman who'd tried to destroy my marriage were the same person. I couldn't have one without the other. So I'd chosen neither. Chosen instead to build a life she couldn't touch, with a woman she'd never valued, in a home she'd never enter. That life is quiet, simple, built on small daily choices to prioritize what matters. Olivia makes coffee in the morning. We eat breakfast together, talk about our days, make plans for the future, come home to each other. It's ordinary, unremarkable. The kind of life my mother had tried to convince me I shouldn't want. And it's perfect. Not because it's dramatic or special, but because it's mine, ours. Built by two people who chose each other, kept choosing each other, even when the easiest path would have been to give up. My mother's words still echo sometimes. Easily replaceable. But they've lost their power. Because Olivia isn't replaceable. Our marriage isn't replaceable. The life we've built, with all its scars and hard-won peace, isn't replaceable. And the mother who couldn't see that was the only thing that ever needed replacing. I replaced her with freedom, with boundaries, with the understanding that I deserved a family that celebrated me rather than controlled me. That was the real choice, not between my mother and my wife, between the man my mother needed me to be and the man I actually was. I chose myself, and in choosing myself, I saved my marriage. That's the story I'll tell if anyone asks. Not that my wife turned me against my family, but that my family's betrayal finally opened my eyes to what I'd always deserved: respect, partnership, and a love that didn't require losing myself to maintain. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.